My neighbor's awful singing drove our whole building crazy. She lost it when I started singing back just as badly. Her name is Sinead Wynn. She lives in 4B, I live in 4C, and the wall between us is thin enough that I can hear her refrigerator door close. For most of a year, that wall carried her voice into my apartment every single day. She sang in the morning before work, and she sang at night when people were trying to sleep. She sang the same 6 or 7 songs over and over, always the ones with the high parts she could not reach. She played backing tracks through a speaker loud enough that the bass came up through my floorboards. She opened her windows so it would carry into the courtyard. That was not an accident. She wanted to be heard. It was not good singing. I need to say that plainly, because everything that happened later depends on it. It was flat, and it was pushed, and it cracked in the same 3 places every time. She would hold a note past the end of the line, and it would wobble like a shopping cart with a bad wheel, and she was completely, unshakably certain that it was beautiful. People tried. Rodney on the 4th floor knocked on her door in the spring and asked her politely if she could close her windows after 9. She told him she was practicing, and that practice was not noise. Gail from the end of the hall slid a note under her door and got a full concert the next evening in reply. Windows open, volume up, like an answer written in the only language she used. Rex asked her in the elevator, very nicely, if she could maybe use headphones for the backing tracks at least. She told him that real art bothers small minds. That is an actual sentence she said to a man holding a laundry basket. Everyone who tried came away looking like the unreasonable one, because she always had the same 3 answers ready before you finished your first. It is my home. I am allowed. You are only saying that because you are jealous. Miles, our building manager, talked to her twice that I know of. Both times she told him she was within her rights, and both times she sang that same night, louder, like a receipt. After a while, people stopped knocking. That is the part I want you to understand about how she got away with it for so long. It was not that she won an argument. It was that everyone got tired, and tired looks exactly like agreement from the outside. She had a whole building full of quiet, polite, worn-down people, and she read that quiet as applause. The woman in 3A moved out in February and told the movers it was because of the noise, and Sinead stood in the hallway and told me the girl had probably just gotten a better offer somewhere. Rodney told me later that he had gone as far as pricing out what it would cost him to break his lease in March. He had the number written down. He had worked out that 8 weeks of rent as a penalty was cheaper than another year of his ceiling humming at 11 at night, and the only reason he stayed was that his sister talked him out of it over the phone. That is what one person with a speaker did to a building full of adults. By summer, it had a schedule you could set a watch by. Warm-ups at 7 in the morning, scales going up and down while I was still trying to sleep, a break during the working day, then the real set from about 8 in the evening until whenever she got tired, windows open, bass through the boards, the same 6 or 7 songs in more or less the same order, and the closer always last, always the loudest, always the one she poured her whole chest into. I could hum the backing tracks from memory. I could tell you which second of which song her voice was going to break in, and I was right every time, because it broke in the same place every time, and she never once heard it happen. I want to be honest about my own part in this, because it matters later. My voice is not any better than hers. I am a genuinely bad singer. I have always known it. I have never once thought otherwise, and it turned out to be the most useful thing about me, because after 11 months of living beside a woman who could not hear herself, I figured out the only thing nobody in that building had tried. Everyone had told her. Nobody had shown her. So one evening in June, when she started up with the closer she always saved for last, I stood on my side of the wall and I sang it with her. Same song, same key, same volume, and I did not clean it up. I hit every wrong note I had, and I have a full collection. I cracked where she cracked. I reached for the high part and missed it by the same distance she missed it. I was not mocking her. I want that on the record too, because she has told a lot of people otherwise. I was matching her. At first she sang louder, because she thought it was a contest, and a contest was something she understood. I sang louder too. We went back and forth for 20 minutes, 2 terrible voices climbing over each other through a wall, and I did not let up once. She threw in a run to try to lose me. I threw it right back, badly, exactly as badly. Then her music stopped, then her door opened. Then my door was getting hit with the side of a fist. She was standing in the hallway when I opened it, red in the face, breathing hard, and she said, "What is wrong with you? That is horrible. I cannot hear myself over that." I looked at her and said, "Now you know." She did not get it. She truly did not. She stood in my doorway and told me my voice was awful, that I had no training, that some people simply should not sing, and every single word she said about me was a word this building could have said about her for 11 months. She said her singing was practice and mine was noise. I told her that a wall does not know the difference between practice and noise. It just carries whatever you put into it. She said I had no right to do that next to her. I asked her how it was any different from what she did to me every day. She did not have an answer for that one, so she reached for a different one instead. She said I was harassing her. Then she went inside, and 40 minutes later she was singing again, and so was I. And that is how the rest of that week went. 2 bad voices, every evening, until the neighbors who had spent 11 months banging on her door started banging on both of ours. I took that gladly. Getting yelled at was a small price, and it was the first time in 11 months that the noise had a cost for her too, because now the whole floor was against the sound, instead of against one woman they had run out of ways to talk to. On the Thursday of that week, there was a different kind of knock on my door. Soft, late, around 10. I went over and listened before I opened it, and Sinead's voice came through the wood, and it did not sound like her. It sounded small. She said, "Do I really sound that bad?" I opened the door. She was standing there with her arms down at her sides instead of crossed, and her shoulders were lower than I had ever seen them, and for 1 second she looked like a person instead of a position. I did not answer fast enough. Part of me wanted to tell her yes, gently, the way somebody should have told her 10 years ago, instead of clapping politely and letting her go home believing it. But before I got a word out, her face closed. It happened right in front of me, like a hand pulling a curtain, and she straightened up and said, "Forget it. Everyone is going to hear the difference." And she walked away. 40 seconds later, she was singing again, louder than before, pushing every note like she was angry at it. I have thought about that 10 seconds in the doorway a lot since. She knew. Somewhere underneath all of it, she already knew, and she went back inside and sang over the top of it. Here is where it stopped being about singing. On the Tuesday I came home and there was an envelope taped to my door with the building letterhead said on it, a formal noise complaint had been filed against me. A written complaint, logged and dated, describing me as a tenant who had been deliberately targeting a neighbor with sustained noise over a period of weeks, and it said that a second complaint would trigger a fine under the terms of my lease. I read it 3 times standing in the hallway with my bag still on my shoulder. Then I went down to the office, and Miles let me in and would not quite look at me. He said Sinead had come in with it already typed up. He said she had told him I had been doing this for weeks, that she was frightened in her own home, that she had asked me nicely to stop, and I had escalated instead. He said his hands were tied, that a written complaint goes in the file. That is simply how it works. I asked him whether anyone in 11 months had ever filed anything about her. He said people had called, people had complained in the hallway, people had mentioned it. Calling is not filing. That was the whole difference between us, and she knew it, and I did not. She had been the loudest person in that building for almost a year, and she was the only one of us with a piece of paper, and she was not finished. That Friday, there was a flyer on every door on every floor. Building talent night, Saturday the 22nd, common room, 7 o'clock, and 2 names listed as the featured performers. Sinead Wynn, and directly underneath it, mine. She had signed me up. She had not asked me. She had gone to Miles and told him we had worked things out between us, and thought a friendly show would be a nice way to settle it, and he had printed 40 copies and taped them up himself. I stood in that hallway looking at my own name in bold letters under hers, and I understood the shape of what she was building. She was not trying to win a singing contest. She was building a version of the story where she was the patient artist offering an olive branch, and I was the unstable neighbor with a complaint on file who could not let it go. If I tore the flyers down, I was the one who refused. If I showed up and sang badly, I was the one making a scene. If I showed up and somehow sang well, which was never going to happen in this life, then I had been mocking her all along. Every door in the maze led back to her. Gail caught me by the elevator that afternoon with a grocery bag on her hip and told me quietly that Sinead had been going floor to floor telling people I was obsessed with her. Rex told me she had told him I knocked on her door and challenged her to a competition. Rodney told me she had told him I had a terrible voice, which, to be fair to her, was the only true thing anywhere in the campaign. She came to my door herself on the Thursday before the show, arms crossed, chin up, wearing the face she put on when she was about to hand you something she thought you should be grateful for. She said, I have been singing for years. I have had lessons. I have performed. You are going to embarrass yourself on Saturday, and I am telling you now so you can back out with some dignity. I leaned on the doorframe and said, I appreciate the warning. That threw her completely. She had come up the hall expecting an argument, and I gave her a thank you instead. She narrowed her eyes and said, You do not seem nervous. I said, Should I be? She looked at me a beat too long, and something moved behind her face, the same crack I had seen in the doorway on the other Thursday, and then she covered it and told me not to waste everybody's time and went home. I closed my door and stood there a minute. She was not sure. Underneath the sparkle and the lessons and the small minds, she was not sure, and she was about to put herself in front of 40 people to prove she was. I called my friend Simon that night and told him all of it, start to finish, and he let me get the whole thing out before he said anything. Then he said, So she gets a stage, an audience, and a paper trail, and you get a fine. And I said, Yes, that is exactly it. And then I stopped talking, because he had just handed me the word without meaning to. Paper trail. She had 1 piece of paper. I had 11 months. I did not sleep much that night. I sat at my table with a mug going cold in front of me, and I started pulling everything I had, and it turned out I had far more than I thought, because I am the kind of person who never deletes anything. I had emailed the office about the noise 4 separate times, and every one of those emails was sitting in my sent folder, with a date and a time stamped on it that I had not put there and could not have changed. The first one was from the previous August. I had written down the worst nights in the notes app on my phone, times and durations, 10:40 to 11:50, 7:15 to 9:05, because I had wanted to be reasonable and specific if it ever came to a conversation. Every one of those entries carried a date the phone had added on its own. I had my lease, and stapled into the back of my lease was the quiet hours addendum that every single tenant in that building signs on the day they move in, page 4, initialed, no amplified sound after 10. I had the group email Miles had sent all 40 units the previous winter, reminding everybody about that addendum, which he had sent, I am certain, because of her. The August email was the one that got me. I read it back at 2 in the morning, and it was so polite it was almost hard to look at. I had written that I did not want to cause any trouble, that I was sure she did not realize how far the sound carried, that I would be grateful if somebody could mention it to her when they got a chance. No trouble, when they got a chance. 11 months of that tone, sitting in a folder, every one of them time stamped to the minute by a server that does not care how anybody feels about it. I printed all 4. I printed the addendum page. I printed 16 entries out of the notes app with their dates showing, and I laid them out on my table in order, left to right, August through June, and for the first time since this started, I was not upset. By 4 in the morning, I had a folder. Not a feeling, not a complaint, not my word against hers. A folder with dates in it. In the morning, I went down to the office and asked Miles for one more thing, and this is the part where the whole thing turned over. I asked him whether Sinead had ever submitted anything in writing herself. Not a complaint, a request. He went very quiet, and then he went to the filing cabinet, and he was in there a long time, because she had. 9 months earlier, Sinead Wynn had filled out a building request form asking for written permission to use amplified backing tracks in her unit between 7 in the morning and 11 at night. She had listed the equipment. She had signed it and dated it in her own handwriting. And underneath, in the manager section of that form, Miles had written that the request was denied under the quiet hours addendum, and he had signed and dated that too. She had asked. She had been told no, in writing, 9 months ago, and she had done it every single day since. Miles photocopied it for me, and his hand was not steady doing it. Then I asked him one more question. I asked him for the date on her complaint against me. He pulled it and read it out. She had filed it on the 9th of June. I went home and sat down with my own log, and I already knew, but you check anyway. The first night I ever sang back through that wall was the 11th of June. She had filed a written complaint describing weeks of sustained, targeted noise from my apartment 2 full days before I made a single sound. And the 9th of June, according to a dated invoice sitting in my own email, was the Sunday I spent 4 hours on the other side of town shooting a family portrait session in someone else's back garden. garden, 3 in the afternoon until 7 at night, with a signed booking confirmation and a receipt attached to it. I was not even in the building on the day she says I terrorized her. I did not tear down the flyers. I went to the talent night, but I did not bring a song. There were about 35 people in that common room, folding chairs in rows, extra ones dragged in from storage. Gail had made cookies. Simon sat in the front, dead center, because he said if he was going to be my witness, he was going to be a visible one. Rodney stood against the back wall. Rex took the spot by the door. Sinead went first. She had a sparkly top and full makeup, and she picked up the microphone like it had been waiting for her since birth, and she sang 3 songs, and 35 people sat in folding chairs and endured it exactly the way they had endured it for 11 months. Nobody clapped between songs. She did not notice. When she finished, she took a small bow and said, "Beat that," and she held the microphone out to me. I took it and I did not sing. I said that before anything else, I wanted to read 4 dates out loud, and I asked Miles if he would confirm them for the room, because every one of them came out of his own files. The room went very still. It was the kind of still where you can hear a folding chair creak 3 rows back. I read the date on her request form, and I read the line written in the manager section, and I said the word denied. I read the date on the quiet hours addendum stapled into the back of every lease in that room, and I asked people to look at page 4 when they got home tonight. I read the date on her complaint against me, the 9th of June. Then I read the date of the first night I ever sang through that wall, the 11th of June, 2 days later. And I said, out loud, in a very quiet room, that on the 9th of June I was 4 miles away at a portrait session from 3 until 7, and that the booking confirmation and the receipt were in the folder in my hand if anybody wanted to see them, and that she had described weeks of noise coming out of my apartment before there was any. Miles cleared his throat and confirmed the request form. He confirmed the denial and read his own handwriting out loud. He confirmed the date on the complaint. He said it 3 times, once for each piece of paper, and every time he said it, the room got heavier. Rex said, from the back, "She asked permission 9 months ago and got told no," and Miles said yes. Nobody laughed. That surprised me, honestly. I had half expected the room to turn on her the way rooms do, and instead 35 people sat very still in folding chairs and did the arithmetic at the same time. 9 months, told no, every night since. Gail said, into the quiet, that Sinead had come to her door that very afternoon and asked her whether she thought she was a good singer, and that she had told her she thought she was very enthusiastic. Somebody breathed out hard through their nose. Simon did not move at all. He just watched me with his hands on his knees, and later he told me the thing that got him was that I never once said the word bad out loud in that room. I did not have to. I had not come to say she sang badly. Everybody there already knew that and had known it for 11 months, and knowing it had never been worth anything, because knowing something is not the same as being able to prove when it started. That was all it took. That was the entire thing. It was not the singing that ended it. The singing was never going to end it, because she genuinely could not hear it, and you cannot argue somebody out of a thing they cannot hear. What ended it was 4 dates, 2 of them in her own handwriting. Sinead stood in the middle of that common room with the microphone stand between her and 35 people, and I watched 11 months of construction come apart in about 90 seconds. And this time she did not have the third answer ready, because there is no version of it is my home, and I am allowed that survives a form you filled out yourself that proves you asked, and were told no, and did it anyway, every day, for 9 months. Gail put her plate of cookies down on the chair beside her. Somebody in the 3rd row said, not quietly, that Sinead had knocked on her door last week to tell her I was obsessed. Rodney said he had almost broken his lease in March and paid the penalty out of pocket. Sinead said the complaint was about how it felt, not about exact dates, and nobody made a sound, because every person in that room had just been read the exact dates. She looked at Miles and Miles looked at the floor. Then she walked out through the middle of the folding chairs and down the hall, and we heard her door close, and it did not slam. Miles withdrew the complaint against me the following Monday, and put the withdrawal in writing, which I appreciated more than he understood, because by then, I had learned exactly what writing is worth. He sent the whole building a fresh copy of the Quiet Hours addendum with the amplification section highlighted in yellow, and he taped one to the corkboard by the mailboxes, and one to the door of 4B. Nobody had to knock on her door again. That was the point. Nobody should ever have had to. The building was quiet that night. Really quiet. In a way I had genuinely forgotten was possible in that apartment. No backing tracks, no bass coming up through the floor, no high note dying somewhere behind my headboard at 11:40. The next night was quiet too, and the one after that, and the week after that. About 2 weeks later, I passed her in the hallway on my way to the elevator, and she did not look at me, and I did not make her. She had earbuds in, both of them, and her lips were moving, just barely, just enough to see if you happened to be looking. She was still singing. She sings every day. Nobody hears it. On her door, the highlighted addendum, taped at one corner, curling in the hallway light.